All right, I'm joined today by Councilman Robert E. Cornegy Jr. from Brooklyn. Thank you so much for joining me today. And it's for I know you guys are working on the front lines and working under adapted conditions, and representing your constituents and the people of the city of New York. So thank you for taking time out today to speak with me and answer some questions. I also want to say that I have a quick joke. What do you get with the shortest hair that I did myself and the longest dreads ever? You get this interview. No, no, I know you're Rob. I love your hair. Councilman Cornegy is also you are the Guinness Book of World Record holder for the tallest elected official. Is that in the world or country? In the world, correct?
In the world, absolutely.
All right, fine. So don't stand up because then we won't be able to see you on camera. No, but thank you so much for joining us again today. You represent which district and what neighborhoods in Brooklyn?
I am the 36th Council District, the Fighting 36, and I represent Bed-Stuy and Northern Crown Heights.
Okay, absolutely. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about, let's go back a little bit, like your career, how you got into politics, why you're in politics, why you wanted to be an elected official, because I know that you're a fighter for the people.
So listen, I've had the pleasure of having a few careers. One was in sports, obviously, and I got to play professionally in Israel, Turkey, France, Spain, and Colombia. And when I came back, I opened a residence for mentally ill chemical abusers. And I didn't realize the RFP process or any of that kind of stuff. And when I went to local elected officials to try to get support, people were unfamiliar with what I was doing. It was a very difficult process to even help people. So I just, I literally followed the money. I wanted to be of assistance to people who were voiceless at that time, and began to work with Senate and Assembly members, became chief of staff to a senator and an Assembly member, and realized that the way to make change most effectively and sustainably was through policy and legislation. So that's kind of encapsulated version of what led me to be here. And prior to getting by the way, I was a legislative policy analyst. So I've been doing policy and legislation even before getting elected for quite some time.
So you're not just an elected official who has a legislative aid right there, their policy. You're sitting there, shoulders on the table in the paper as well, and writing law and policy as well.
Yeah. So a quick joke: when I first had my first bill passed, it was a big celebration and congratulatory, which they do for new members. And then someone realized how many pieces of legislation I had written before getting elected, an elected official, and he took back all of his congratulations because he was like, "It's not fair. You've been doing this for a long time for us and for members, so you don't get to enjoy the celebration." So that was kind of like a funny thing.
Absolutely, yeah, that is very funny. And well, thank you for all the legislation you've written, and for thinking of all these amazing things for your constituents and for the city of New York. What going a little bit wider, what do you think the status of New York City is right now at the moment?
I think we're in a freeze and in a pretty difficult place, man, because the federal government is trying to make us choose between safety and economic recovery, and that's a terrible position to be in, especially for the small business capital of the world. And the reality is, we can do two things. We can bring back the economy in some ways while still protecting our citizens and doing that. It's not mutually exclusive. But all you're reading is, oh, if we open a company, if we open the economy, then we're not being responsible to safety. And I just don't think it's like that. I think you can do both. You can begin to slowly open up the economy, which you have to, right? Especially in a city like the biggest city in the world, the most progressive city in the world. You can't have the economy frozen in the way that it has. But they're not juxtaposed. Like they keep they grilled Fauci yesterday as if a scientist and a healthcare professional couldn't make a recommendation, and if he did, it meant that the destruction of the economy as we know it, that's very dramatic. We can, in tandem, begin to open, I believe, the economy while still protecting our citizens. I can't believe that the most progressive country in the world can't figure out a way to do both.
Well, it certainly seems that some of the pre-pandemic polarization of our country, and especially moving into a general election, has reared its ugly head in this divide during a pandemic. When, to me, this is a time to come together and to unify. Let's put the bullshit aside. And I feel like you're always the councilman who's put the bullshit aside. Like, what is commonsensical for me, for the community, for the city? What do you think are practical solutions? Or there's no light switch. We all know that. But like, what's the transition, and how do we get towards opening those small businesses again?
Well, first of all, I gotta say that this pandemic, if I'm being honest, has really illustrated the tale of two cities, right? So we're getting to clearly see that the way that law enforcement and education and small business, because the stimulus package, which at first was $249 billion, and then $500 billion, never made its way to communities like mine and commercial thoroughfares like mine that are vibrant, right? So we never got that. So we know even economically and through small business, there are inequities. And what the crisis has done is really exacerbate that. But it gives us a chance to pivot, to make sure that, there's a saying that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So if we take care of small business, mom and pop businesses, micro businesses, if we take care of those businesses, they'll hire more. The economy will open up in that way, but we can't go back to the old way of doing. We'll never be able to go back to the old way of doing business and the inequities. So until we address the inequities, the city's never going to be as great as it could possibly be when you have this tale of two cities. So I just really got to say that, Warren. I know that wasn't the question, but I think it segues into what your question is. Like, until we decide that there is some equity that we can get in all of these very important areas, healthcare, education, small business, like until we really, housing, until we really determine that and do away with this underclass as it's seen, we're never going to be a great city. So I think we should be focusing and looking at how we can pivot. I'm a little bit angry, to be honest with you, that the mayor has decided to do a whole bunch of new task force and committees. Like, I don't really need a task force to tell me that there's inequities in law enforcement. Like, I need a task force for that. I don't need a task force to tell me that it's estimated that 51% of businesses, small businesses, won't be able to return after this crisis. And almost 80% of the 51% are Black and Hispanic and minority businesses. I don't need a task force for you to tell me that. So we've got a year and a half. He's got a year and a half in office. I think that should be a year and a half of action. What really we're going to do a task force? Like, really we're going to do a committee? And I've been asked to participate, and I'm like, I'm not participating. Like, I'm not, unless there is some stimulus money. Unless that last year we had arguably a $93 billion budget. You mean to tell me that we couldn't find a way to have that money trickle down to small businesses? I mean, come on. So in your household, with all due respect, you and your wife, your budget is reflective of what you are serious about. So if you tell me you want to buy another home on Lake George, but your budget, you bought shoes and your wife bought shoes and you bought Gucci, the budget's not reflected. That's what we are as a city. So we say that we support small business.
That's such a good way to look at it. That really hits home, and it creates such an amazing visual. It makes it personal.
Right. But that's like, it's literally that simple. So with whether it's a $93 billion budget or whether it's your home budget of whatever your income is, it's definitely reflective of what your commitments are. 100%.
But my wife doesn't have high-paid lobbyists pushing me to buy her shoes, though.
not yet. Just don't let her see the piece. But that's true. So until we decide as a city, so there are cities, and I often point to, not during this crisis because Atlanta's in turmoil, but prior to that, Atlanta had found a way to bring its underclass up to some degree, have them participate in the contracting process, and change the perspective of the communities that they serve. So you mean to tell me?
And you mean really let them participate, because of course we're New York, we're progressive, we have all these programs, but you're saying that it's bullshit. I
No,
guess,
it's definitely
or not
bullshit
bullshit.
because minorities are still largely subcontractors on all of this great, on all of the great billions that we spend on development. Minorities are still fighting for prime contracts. There's still subs on everything. So, I mean, until we decide that there'll be some equity there, and it's difficult. I understand we're a labor-driven city, and big shout out to labor, because for Black folks, to some degree, labor has led to the middle class, whether it's through the DOE, whether it's through school construction authority, whether it's through the police department. Labor unions have provided a structure that minorities have benefited from. So I don't want to be disingenuous in saying that, but we are a labor-driven city, which limits some of what sweeping change that could happen, because we are in such partnership with our labor union.
Go union. Go union.
Go union. I shout out to labor. A lot. Bed-Stuy, which gets a bad reputation, but it is a largely working class community. And not the new Bed-Stuy where brownstones are 3 million, but back in the days when Black folks were kind of relegated to being here, the labor movement assisted in helping purchase homes and helping, put kids through college and things that weren't necessarily available through labor. Blacks in this country and in the city in particular have benefited from. So I don't want to be disingenuous, but everything has its flip side. And the flip side to it is that sweeping change can't happen even when it's absolutely necessary, because we're inexplicably tied to our relationships with labor.
I want to, since we're on this topic, I want to dive in a little deeper. There have been a lot of calls from from the left, when this first started, there, moratoriums on mortgages, which help landlords and helps, owners of a home. But, nothing except for, some individuals taking it upon themselves, including Sal, from Brooklyn, who got a lot of attention. But, but renters, and tenants might have a much tougher time. They're working some of the lower class jobs or the service jobs, and restaurants are closed, things are closed, like they don't have money to pay rent, but there weren't protections put into place. And I know that there were a lot of complaints. How do you feel about that, since I think it's intertwined with that inequality?
Well, it's a delicate balance, and the governor has actually put a moratorium on rents for 3 months, right, during the pandemic, where you don't there's a rent freeze, which was called for by the Rent Guidelines Board, which was called for by a lot of people. That's been instituted on a state level now, but there's a delicate balance that has to be struck. So there's these large buildings with owners who the increased energy costs, who a lot. So even the forbearance that were put on mortgages for homeowners, still doesn't really do what it needs to do, because a lot of the expenses in energy is in water, sewer, and tax. Those things there's no moratorium on that. You got to pay your water and sewer. They're trying to find ways to put that on the back end and all of that. So this takes a nuanced brand of leadership to look out for homeowners simultaneously while you're looking out for renters. And I think that we have enough thought leaders in the city of New York to do that. So it's a delicate balance. Myself, as the chair of housing and buildings, are faced with coming up with some of those alternatives that will give relief that should be given to renters while not crippling small homeowners. So there's this small landlord group where one guy has 8 units in a building that he bought in 1975, and he's really trying to struggle to keep up with the escalating energy costs, escalating water, sewer, and taxes. And when you give his 8 tenants a rent freeze and him a forbearance, he still got those energy costs. So we still have to build that in. And I'm working with the administration and with the governor to see if we can't get some breaks on taxes, which unfortunately, we're looking at an $8 billion revenue deficit in this year's budget. Because of people not being able to pay their taxes, because of all of these kinds of things. I'm trying to look forward to the next 3 months when we get back in action and how we react as a city to people who've had these issues, and whether we're foreclosing or people around, what happens to people then is going to be really important. It's important now, but it's also going to be really important when the country opens up again. So that's a really delicate balance, but I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think we can take care of renters and homeowners simultaneously to make sure that when we come out of this, nobody's displaced. So nobody loses their home because they were unable to pay their mortgage, and no one loses their residence because they were unable to pay their rent. I think we can do that, but we're getting to a very critical time. As of last week, we were looking at an $8.3 billion deficit, revenue generating deficit. It may be more as we speak today. Like today's a stated meeting. I'm on finance and the budget negotiation team, so I'm privy to how the city is being impacted revenue-wise during this COVID, and it's equally as horrible. So, the inability to collect taxes, the inability to collect all of these things has a negative impact on the city and its city services when we come out of this. So the very people that we seek to help is kind of a little vicious cycle.
Yeah, no, to me, it's like, you have, except for the federal government that can just keep printing cash, it doesn't need to, balance a budget. You're tasked with, and your colleagues are tasked with on the city level to balance a budget and to have a budget and to maintain all the workers, right? Because we don't want to furlough city workers, right? We want to protect them. They need it, but it's all interconnected. It trickles. If they don't get paid, they can't pay rent. They're not paying, their landlord, and then they can default. So it's scary how it's all interconnected. And I also think that it's got to be troublesome being on the finance committee, to try to balance a budget where you're spending a ton of money outgoing, but you're not bringing it in. As a business owner, that math doesn't work, and as a government, that doesn't work. So it's an interesting and very tricky and challenging time as far as balancing any budget and maintaining the city of New York.
And the funny thing is, it's a vicious cycle because some of the very programs that provide sustainable pathways for people either to not be incarcerated. For example, there's a program that the Brooklyn District Attorney has. Some people would say it's an expensive program, but it's an alternative to incarceration program. So as opposed to just locking folks up, they've continually worked with low-level offenders to be able to get them into a job situation and those kinds of things. That program is in tremendous jeopardy. So what does that mean to the 1,000 people who got a chance to reinvent themselves? That doesn't happen. And so there is a butterfly effect to this whole thing that is going to have negative impacts for years on communities that were just finding a way to get themselves back together again. So so while we have so the funny thing about leadership is and we have to look at the immediate urgency that's of today. There are people who are hungry today and who are not, because of their loss of employment, going to be able to buy groceries. You got to get those people the food that they need. You got to get those people groceries. You got to get those people to be able to sustain themselves, while simultaneously looking to the future and trying to balance a budget. It's not easy, but most of us are up to the task. This is what we signed on for. This is what leadership is about. It's not about whether or not you can lead in good times. Can you lead in crisis? Can you make tough decisions at the budget negotiation table to ensure that New Yorkers are going to get what they need, past, present, and future? It's not easy. Sometimes I think about what the mayor's challenge is and what the governor's challenge is with these huge budgets around DOE, around, the two largest budgets for us are the Department of Education and the police department. right? So they're gonna see tremendous cuts. What's the impact on our security and safety if there are cuts to NYPD, right? So there are arguments on both sides. What are our impact to competing globally, our students competing globally, because we're not competing in New York, we're competing globally. What's the impact with the proposed cuts on our ability as a city and our students to, so it's the stuff, Warren, that keeps you up at night, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to, let's get back into your district, down the block, or, where you're at, where your office is. What does Fulton Street look like right now?
Fulton Street is a ghost town, man. And it's really scary because we've worked really hard to provide retail diversity, to make Fulton Street not a one-off. Like, we've been very intentional on how we occupy those stores, who occupies them, because we want to create commercial thoroughfares that encourage you to come out and shop. We were just in the throes of a real live, between the bids and the merchants associations, real live retail diversity, and the owners and developers. So we've had a pleasure, since there is a transition in development, to speak to developers about their space. And don't do another 99-cent store, even though you can get your lease met. Let's do something that really creates, a very walkable commercial thoroughfare. And now it's virtually all shut down. And most of those small businesses were on a wing and a prayer, and the ability for them to come back. So we've actually unintentionally, potentially expedited gentrification in some ways, because these long-term businesses that have occupied those spaces that provide good service won't be able to come back. And we already know that some developers had their minds set on these high lease prices. And so now all of these leases are going to be broken because they can't pay back or forward, or they're really in a hole. So it's a scary time for retail along commercial thoroughfares in neighborhoods, and trying to keep, we try to keep Bed-Stuy and East New York and Brownsville and Williamsburg very authentic, because the part of Brooklyn that's so awesome is its authenticity. So to know that you could go to Flatbush and get the best Caribbean food in the world, that you can come to Bed-Stuy and get the best soul food in the world, that you can go to Bushwick and get the best Spanish food in the world. We really are struggling to keep that authenticity, which helps increase foot traffic, which helps increase tourism, with all of that kind of stuff. So there's this larger context that nobody wants to go to strip malls in Brooklyn where everything looks the same, every store is the same. We love going places. There's places, if you want whatever you want, this is the place to get it. And now that's in jeopardy tremendously.
And I mean, that which is sad. I mean, the small business owners, you're right there, a hope and a dream, and to have this, something that is global, affecting them and not being able to come back would be terribly sad. And it's also sad to hear that some of the aid and assistance isn't trickling down, or they're being left behind. I want to move on to ask you, what do you think? I've been talking about it a lot on here, about what I call the coronavirus shuffle, meaning, you mentioned developers, and saying that developers, they're going to keep building. They want Bed-Stuy. They want to put up big buildings. I was living in New Orleans, so I hadn't been in New York in about 6 months, but went to Brooklyn the other day. Every time I go back, this gas station's a new tower. This is this tower. If there's going to be a coronavirus shuffle with some folks moving out, how can all those buildings be sustained? How will they be full? What's the deal? Where's it going to go? Where does it give?
So the funny thing is, while you're seeing these larger developments being built, they're largely empty. So I'm curious as to what the plan for them are, because they weren't designed for the current demographics that are represented here, because the prices suggest that there's another market that they're marketing to. But in this virus, now they're stuck. because nobody's moving at this point. Like, I think there'll be a shuffle, but we will. So here's the reality. Prior to the coronavirus, economists had already said we were, trending towards a recession, which means these large rents that they were anticipating getting, or large condo fees that they were anticipating getting, weren't going to happen. So downtown Brooklyn, those large towers are still largely empty. I don't know who they were intending to come, whether they were, the borough president talks about people coming from the Midwest and all of those kinds of things. Right now, the virus has people reluctant to come to New York City as kind of like the epicenter in this country of new infections. And we expect to see, I don't know if Fauci said it, but we definitely expect to see a second wave, right? It's been second waves in other places. So, and because of the density, because of the amount of people, which we love and celebrate in this borough, there's a likelihood of further transmissions once this thing is open. And I think that's going to have an impact on real estate more than anything else. So the normal shuffle, which is to move people out slowly or quickly or all of those kinds of things, I think has hit a snag. So those forecasters who said, I'm going to buy this building in Bed-Stuy or the space in Bed-Stuy, I'm going to build 18, 20, 30 stories, and I'm going to make a ton of money, I think are very scared right now because the market is tanking as we speak, and the virus is limiting people's movement as we speak. And so the result of that, I think, is going to be actually a backlash on forecasters and developers and what they thought they were going to be able to do in community. So those who got in and got out already and left with a bag of cash, they came in, bought something, flipped it, and sold it, they're going to be fine, obviously. They're already in Brownsville and East New York doing the same thing. But for Bed-Stuy, I think we hit a snag. And I think that people are going to be trying to get rid of some of this stuff at dirt prices, and are going to ultimately have to, like you look at some of the hotels who are now banking on this homeless problem to be able to sustain their business model. So if you go to any hotel in the city, there's a likelihood that at least a few of those rooms, even the high end, are occupied by people who are in the system.
Yep.
So that model is shifting, and I don't know if, you know what I mean? I think it's up in the air right now. I've talked to some real estate developers because I'm in housing and building. They're scared to death, right? Quite frankly, that they're going to get.
I don't blame them.
Get left holding the bag.
I used to tell, I used to tell folks, like tell my wife, tell friends, I don't understand how it's sustainable with all that overdevelopment, but it's certainly not, after the pandemic. It's just with the demand decreasing and those prices. I mean, again, I feel fortunate. I grew up in downtown Brooklyn, in a modestly middle class family. I have two businesses. I've worked really hard to build them. But I can't afford to live in some areas in Brooklyn that I grew up in Brooklyn and I have Brooklyn pride, and I can't. So maybe it'll become more affordable now, but that always perplexed me.
The prices are definitely going to drop. They were going to drop anyway because we were trending toward a recession, and now with the virus and loss of jobs and everybody, my developer friends and God forbid, I actually have friends that are developers, are scared to death at this point that their investment, that they won't see a return on their investment, quite frankly. All over the city.
With the prices coming down, if we weren't live, I would cue Mace, welcome back, and maybe I'll come back.
Right. This is definitely the time. Obviously, cash is going to be king over the next, few months and even years. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people. The unfortunate portion of this is it could expedite gentrification, which I think you were suggesting, because people won't be able to stay in their homes. Already, African Americans are at the lowest percentage of home ownership that we've ever been in this country, which is amazing because we have way more education, way more access to capital, and we find ourselves at the lowest point in terms of percentages of home ownership that we've ever had in this country. And it's trending even further downward. So there are going to be some people who are displaced from their homes through this crisis. And that's sad, that we can't protect them.
I certainly hope for those folks that we keep pushing legislation or executive orders down the road to and extend that so that there's no foreclosures and no evictions, because it's to be kicked out of your home with nowhere to go at this time is just, it would be ungodly and terrible. I have a couple minutes left, so I want to switch gears a little. I see all that in Anthony Fauci's testimony yesterday. They were like, what the hell is behind him? So I wanted to ask you, tell us a little bit about some of your books behind you, and I see pictures of your beautiful family. So I want share with everyone, like how much time have you been able to spend with them, and did they all come home from college? I know you have a big crew, and you're an amazing father and super proud. A lot of people post about a bunch of other bullshit on Facebook, and you are always at a graduation, a celebration, a basketball tournament, this, that. So I take notes as having younger kids. I take notes and look up to you, because you're taller, but because you're an amazing father also. So tell us about your time with the kids.
So the time has been difficult because I don't know. Just publicly, I've announced that I suffered with corona, the virus myself, and so I had to self-isolate. So a lot of the time that I would have been spending and that people were spending, I had to isolate because I didn't want to jeopardize the health of my family. But we do a Zoom call every Friday. Thank God for Zoom. Every Friday at 5:30. Yeah. All on. It's unstructured. There's no agenda, and I have to mention that because I started with an agenda. My kids were like, "Dad, really? You're gonna hold this like a state meeting, or are we gonna just get together?" So now there are no agendas. I'm very proud of, and sometimes question my kids because they're really awesome, and everybody says their kids are awesome, but I'm serious. Like, I am in awe of what they're able to accomplish when I spend a very high degree of my time in the community. And so I promised my kids that no matter what's going on, I'm coming to games, right? Unfortunately, I have 6 of them. So I got lacrosse players, I got crew, I got basketball and volleyball. And it takes a lot of my time to do. But I do love reading. Like, I love, I read Elon Musk's book before. I'm reading it again now with a new context because he's trying to open up his plants. So I'm trying to see, I read the book once already and I'm reading it again now because of what he's facing and his ability to go against the grain and not even caring whether he's arrested at this point in an effort to further his vision. So he's that driven. I think people are giving him a bad rap. I think it's just that he wants to do this work and he can't sit. Like, he's sort of like me. Like, I don't have the resources as him. Some of us are so driven that we can't sit. You can't sit even in a pandemic. Even he wants to be moving in the right direction and moving his companies in the right direction. And so obviously
us entrepreneurs have been known to be impatient.
Absolutely. So and so some of us who are reading, I'm reading it again, and I'm like, I can't be mad at his drive, right? And his drive. So some of us do this work and whatever without the thought of resources. So you're a good example. Like, you got to pay your bills, but you're so passionate about what you do that you got to let somebody else handle that. Like, you got to run your company and you got to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. I think he's very similar, and he's getting a little bit of a bad rap. So I'm reading Elon Musk's book again so I can get back into his head to see if this is really about money. Because I don't get that it's really about money. I get that he has a vision for energy and the production of energy, and he wants his legacy to be this movement from fossil fuels to this thing. That's what I get. And this is me halfway through his book the second time, which none of it speaks about money. And actually, in his book, he was broke more than he had money. So that's the
That's
favorite
what
book I'm reading again now.
that's what my coach says. Like the real entrepreneurs, you make money, you lose money, you do it all over again. You can always dust it off and get back up.
Right. So sometimes I tell
Yeah.
people that I've actually lost more than most people have ever had, which allows me to get back on the horse again when things don't go bad. So.
All right. Well, I know that you have a stated meeting today, and I appreciate you taking time. What can you leave us with? When do you think the city is going to open in any fashion that of normalcy?
So I'm thinking, late June, early July, because they're phasing it in the state, and the governor's being responsible about making sure that there's a protocol and criteria that's set and opening up from that. So, I think if we continue to be very diligent in social distancing, in mask, gloves, and washing our hands, which I think, I don't have the scientific proof, but I think we will at some point, that those protocols being put in place help flatten the curve, right? Anecdotally, I believe that, and I think that the statistics will support that. We got to keep doing that. Like we can't let So what's funny is that the universe, right? I'm getting a little hokey here for a second. The universe has conspired to keep the social distancing going. It's freaking freezing where you are at this time of year, which is very unusual. So I even feel like the universe now has conspired. We're having, it's like Seattle, like we got 3 rainy days a week. The other 2 are gloomy, and then you got a day and a half that looks, so that's really conspiring to keep us indoors and to keep us social distancing. So even the universe is suggesting to us that we continue in this way. So I think if we do that, we can have a June kind of soft opening, but we have to do something. We got to move the economy forward, but we also have to be responsible for health. I think the governor has demonstrated a tremendous amount of leadership in that way, and the mayor has demonstrated a tremendous amount of leadership. I just don't want to do any task force or committees, but other than that,
And we won't go higher than that because there's lots of opinions about the White House and that stuff. But I agree that the governor and the mayor.
Your guy is incredibly petty at the top of the ticket up there, and he's punishing New York right now. I'm clear on that.
Yeah, and he removed himself from the tax base by moving to Florida.
Right. So now it doesn't even impact him as he punishes us.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
But listen, I thank you for allowing me to come on.
Thank you for coming. Where can people find you? I know that you have future aspirations. I know right now you got a year and a half to finish things out and really do the hard work you're doing for your district. And, I know you're kicking ass for everyone and, fighting the issues you say, what needs to be said, not what everyone wants to hear. And you do the right thing and your family should be proud of you. And I'm proud to know you and to have this interview. Where can everyone find you if they want to, learn more about what you're doing in the future?
So my Facebook page and all the social media outlets are very similar. It's Robert Cornegy Jr. So it's ROBERT CORNEGY Jr. The abbreviated version, and listen, I think, yes, I have further aspirations. I'd love to be able to serve at a larger context, but I believe if I continue to do what I do, that story will write itself. I
agree, and I think you'll have a much longer story, and I look forward to watching it. Thank you so much again for joining me, Councilman. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Tell your dad I said hi.
I